So it looks like we're officially live now, hanging out with one of my favorite people in the world. I said world. You'll hear why in just a second.
World.
In the world. Maybe in the universe, maybe in the galaxy. I don't know. That starts reaching beyond the scope of my geekiness there.
Right.
So that expansive universe is for sure. Uh, but I'm kind of doing these on the fly. A little bit of planning, right? I want to be like, hey, you free right now? I mean,
Right.
if I do that and you're free, I'm down. But folks are
For
like,
you,
why?
I probably would have been like, sure.
So folks are like, why are you not putting advance notice? And I'm like, if you make it, you make it. And if you don't, you don't. And this morning I was thinking about it, right? Starting the second guest. And I was like, you know what? There's a reason why Keisha was free on this particular day, 2 days shy of one of my other favorite humans of all time. And so I was thinking about, Prince. And Prince is all about you coming to my concert. I'm having it tomorrow. You free? You coming? You got a ticket? You knew I was coming, and there you go. You're here because whatever, right? Um, and I got Prince inspirations for sure, left and right. And I feel like you're one of the gem of a folk who gets that without me needing to explain 10 times. But
and he's been like heavy on my mind too. So thank you for bringing it up.
I was like, why is he so, I mean, he's always somewhere in my mind, right? But I was like, why is he in the front of my mind? And I was like, Google Prince so I could remember dates because something around this time. And I'm like, yeah, we're like 2 days shy, right?
Yep.
And for me, it was like this journey kind of kicked off with imagine what you'd all be like in your own game. And that's like some Prince wisdoms. And I've been seeing you play it at your own game, hustling against the grain of the game we're all learning to want to aspire to. And you're one of the folks who constantly is like that affirmation, that little nudge of like, do your thing however you see fit. So for me, it's a selfish ass joy to be here with you in this virtual space because it's been a hot minute since I've seen you in the real life.
Right.
And this is as real as it's going to get for a lot of us for a good while. So,
exactly.
Before I ramble your damn ear off for the next few minutes here, I'm going to let you take the mic and just tell us a little bit about yourself, however you see fit, as you tend to do, which works for the rest of us.
Oh, man. Who am I? I don't know. I'm somebody different every day. I guess in general, right? If I use certain labels and stuff like that, well then I'm a mama, an educator. I've been working in education for 25 years, but yeah, I'm tired. Man, I'm creative sometimes. Encouraging always, right? Like I just love watching people like do their thing. I love watching everybody like do more than survive, right? So I'm a cheerleader for like everyone. I'm not really good at that on my own, to myself. I'm working on that, but I'm a cheerleader for so many other folks. So I'm sure as we have conversation, like other stuff will come up, but that's what I can immediately think about.
Oh, for sure. And I know that most of the folks that I'm like, hey, you want to come play along? I do give you a heads up and I'm like, well, it is National Poetry Month. So if you could share a couple of poems. But I think you're one of those folks who vibes poetically regardless, right? And it's like for as much as I've known you from a distance in multiple ways, I feel like you're one of the folks who I just feel that connection with, and that if we jumped on a call about anything, that we would vibe and understand each other somehow, right? And I think part of what I'm wanting to show is the power in doing that, right? Like showing up authentically and doing what you see for your life, and that can look hella different in a variety of spaces. And you run on that parallel flow, right? In that community college circuit, starting off, I met you at De Anza, and now you ventured off into this other part of the state here. And I might be trailing behind. I don't know, because
Come
It's
on
like,
up.
it's about here. So, I think right now a lot of folks are leaning on poets to give them that sense of hope and that reminder that, you know, we're not superhuman superheroes all the time.
Right.
Sometimes hella on Halloween for sure. But, it's how we flow in the everyday is the poetic piece and what we manage to capture in those official little poems of ours. It's a little reminder, right? Like that someone can open up or hear or vibe with and connect and kind of write their own story on top of it as they go along. And
Yeah.
so, thank you for being you. It gives me life, even when we don't have a chance to connect. It really is like a reminder of how we give each other life in that way. So when you're ready to throw down a poem or two, we'd love to hear one on the Monday afternoon as we resist productivity, even though it feels hella productive in a weird kind of way.
It is. Um, I I didn't even like pull anything up. Uh, Man, I don't even know how I'm feeling right now.
Go there, go there.
It's like I'm tired. Like I think that's the theme is that, I'm just tired. I was talking with one of my program leads earlier today about how tiring it is to have to constantly fight for students. And I never thought that we would have to fight for students working in education. Literally, we don't have jobs. We don't have jobs if students aren't here. Uh,
Mhm.
so maybe, I can do something that's like, is not as poetic, but the idea of being in control or not being in control. Is my internet okay, by the way?
Yeah, it's working for me, but again, I'm contextualizing this from Gilroy, and so that frame of reference, take it however you want.
All right. So this one is called I'm in control. So I'm racing to put these ideas in perspective and I begin to ramble because I can't get them all on paper. I see bright white. It's snow and it feels so cold. I can feel the beat of my heart because it's racing out of control. Not because I'm nervous, but because I don't know what to do with these emotions. I'm used to being played, yet I hold on to things as though it's truth because I want to believe. There's snow everywhere and I'm driving fast. That's normal for me. I hit a decline and see a cliff, and close to the cliff is a snow pile really high. They do that for drivers who are out of control. But I am completely in control. I continue on my way and my mind won't stop racing. At the last second, my brain does pause, so I try to stop. I throw it in third, second gear. I turn hard to the left and my car spins. I still feel it. Control. The car turns, I'm backward. I hit the snow pile. I go over the bank and I still feel control. My body, it's weightless, upside down. I hit the side of the mountain without a sound. I watch myself tumble still in control. I can't see the end, yet I feel compelled to happiness. I stand in awe watching me tumble, all the while thinking to myself, I could have stopped the whole event, but I didn't. So I sit watching me tumble, still in control. I'm kind of feeling that way right now.
Yeah. This is why I'm like, 'cause yeah,
um, I
yep,
guess in part, trying to decide like what I want to do with my life. Like, what am I gonna do when I grow up? Um, and I can stop it, right? I can do something else. Um, but I absolutely love watching students grow. there's something about education that just won't let me like leave completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need stability, man.
I know. And you know, there's that piece where I can see this relating to that part of life, right? And then there's the part of like where we are in this particular moment. And I feel like we've been spinning, and there are parts where I could have, you know, all the things we learned about how to correct a car that's spinning out of control. And I'm as you're talking and sharing that flowetry, I'm thinking to myself, sometimes we're too tired to correct the damn turn. Sometimes I'm like, let's see where this goes, because trying to correct the turn, I don't know what kind of BS gonna come next. And I'm feeling I'm feeling all of that in so many relatable spaces. And it's wild, right? Because I bet when you wrote that, there was probably a particular thing that triggered it into words. And now it just speaks in different contexts.
Yeah. I was at
Yeah.
D'Anza when I wrote that. I was still working at D'Anza when I wrote that. So yeah. You know what though? That place was a mess, but not like up here.
And that's the thing, right? Working within the context of other messes is a big part of the issue.
Yeah.
And now we've got that exhaustion from being people in the world right now, and then being people who are so solid for other folks. And so it's like left and right, right? The students trying to survive and sharing quite a bit with us, because there's that trust in those spaces, and there's the way we flow and vibe, and it's a lot, you know? And it's like I got some Herculean strength, but I feel like it's out of control, you know? I'm home and I'm like, it's out of control. And, you know, we got to play assistant superintendent to our kids' school districts if we have them, or figure out what the changing landscape is of all of that. And it's a lot. Like, I find myself saying that phrase a lot lately. It's a lot. And I'm one of those folks who people are constantly like, how do you navigate all of those? And I'm like, well, partly by force. If I want to engage in this work, as I got to learn how to juggle all those things. But the other piece is, you know, I think I'm curious to see where in reflection I see all the conversations with all you poets, because that's a thing that when you're a multifaceted poet and you do other things for work and life, it plays out in a different thread that we don't always get to in our writings, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm again thankful that you're hanging out with me on this Monday and offering little woven strands of what I'm feeling in my own unbraided hair right now, because my everything's out of control, you know. Shoot.
You know what? I like the theme too, that you keep bringing up. You know, the how much power you have and stuff. Because I literally looked at myself in the mirror today, this morning, and I was like, man, you know, like I am. What did I say? I said I'm capable, but I'm not super, right? And that's what it is, you know, like I go by Professor Q because I'm a nerd like that. And so I figure, well, I either sound like a villain or I'm a, or I'm a hero. But
A little bit of both, depending on the context, right?
but I'm like, but I'm not superhuman, you know. But I am capable. And so you picked up on that theme, you know, like for yourself, like it's just a lot. And yes, I've been saying that too, a lot.
So much.
Yeah.
Yeah. My allergies are out of control right now too, so that's the other thing. It seems like nature's like, y'all fools don't want to learn. I'm gonna keep throwing stuff at you, and let's just see if I can make you take a pause. And it was promising at first, right, when everything was way out of control, that people were just at a loss. But now we figured out how to work around in ways that it's almost like there's that glimmer of we're almost at the end of this period in our history, but we're right back to the beginning in terms of all the stuff that we keep doing to ourselves. And so, a part of that is strategizing to trick myself in my own, tendencies to trip over my own feet. And I'm
Yeah,
like, well, if the only I'm gonna take a pause is to trick myself into thinking I'm doing something productive because it's on a live stream, then let's do it. Let's take a pause like that, and maybe we'll force other people to take a pause in their day too on a Monday afternoon to just sit in conversation.
right.
And me, it gets me back to the integrity of why I even wanted to start a podcast, even though when I was talking about these, I was like, I don't think it has anything to do with the podcast. And it's like, yes, it does, because I have everything to do with the podcast. And the podcast isn't about a podcast, it's about an invitation for other people to just take a damn pause or feel like it's okay or to see themselves, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes we gotta look at ourselves in the mirror and be like, it's a lot and be okay with that. Cause I feel like I struggle to find the space where I'm okay with that.
yeah, yeah. Um, I do a lot of so when we first went remote, you remember last year.
Mhm.
um, I went from oh well, since because not everybody knows me, but so I'm what they call an adjunct, which is a part timer. I teach psychology, but since last year January, I've been the interim STEM center coordinator on our campus, and so I went from working my regular 7.5 hours a day to working 60-hour weeks. And so when spring semester was over, I kid you not, I was like, that will never happen again. That will never happen again. Like, um, our center was open 6 days a week. And so when we went remote, there was no way for me to the only way I knew people were at work is if I showed up. All right, because I gotta do timesheets and stuff. So it ended up being very overwhelming, and I was like, I will never do that again. And it was only for a few weeks. I learned a lot. So I do my best to when the day is over. My day is 10 to 3 usually. So when
Mhm.
the day is over, I that Outlook Outlook goes away. I don't want to hear no notifications. I don't want to talk shop unless I want to talk shop. Um, and then I just, I do my best to try to relax. And I think more of us need to do that. I'll play on Facebook, and check in with people and see how everyone's doing. Or um, I'm famous for binge watching all the stuff. So
And I'm like, what is Keisha watching right now? Because I have all the streaming services and I can't find nothing. So what are you watching? Oh, yeah, I'm gonna watch that next.
man, and maybe that's part of self-care. It's just it's also to me not just about self-care but boundaries,
Yeah.
like and making people adhere to those boundaries because I mean you already know, when it comes to like our supervisors, if we can call them that. um I usually call them non-leader leadership. um
We've got this cross sector, right? I mean, it's a tricky thing. It's a tricky
yeah,
thing. But I
so
think I was thinking about all the pockets of frustration and hope at the same time, right? They always coexist. And I think part of that struggle with the boundaries is our work is so tied to constantly trying to I don't think we enlighten anybody. I don't think we empower anybody. I think you just kind of steer them in a direction a little bit faster by having them think about things that are in the back of their mind by shifting them to the front of their mind, right? Like a lot of classroom work feels that way to me. Um, but when we're both in those spaces and then you're part of populations that are being targeted at the same time. And now everybody has had a reckoning with having to see certain injustices amplified on the media that have always been happening, but they're getting, it's like, look, we can see it now. And so it's like the rest of us have been seeing it sometimes firsthand in a car, and it's freaking terrifying. And
Yeah.
so in this moment, it's like you're being called on as your whole self. And where do you put the line of boundary of like, yes, I've been fighting this fight for a minute. Yes, I feel the injustice. No, do not message me asking me, what are we going to do, Rosanna? Because right now I am just feeling like I just want to breathe
Yeah.
because too many of us don't have, that as a given right in this moment. So it's like the boundary there feels a lot more difficult to untangle for other people to understand, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because they want to know and they want to do good. And it's like, yeah, but I don't really want to provide that strategy for you right now.
Help me understand. Give me the Cliffs Notes to your classes. I cannot. It's a process. I
Yeah.
can't even do that in 12 weeks for students because the work is theirs to do, right? I just ask really good questions and reflect back a lot of pieces of what they're grappling with themselves. But it's we're tired too. We're human too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking forward. So I haven't taught since last summer. So I'm looking forward to teaching this summer and being back in the mix of it all. I miss seeing students, I miss not that I don't see students, I do, but not as classroom faculty, right? And so and I do miss that. I miss, just holding those conversations and, giving them space to figure stuff out. And I miss that, I don't
Showing
know what
up
to do in my life.
poetically. Showing up poetically in full costume on Halloween, like that's poetry in action, often overlooked. There's something about inviting grown folk, who are there to do the responsible thing, that it's okay to play sometimes. It's okay to laugh and just
Right.
be, and there's learning there, right? So I feel like a lot of the glimpses of your poetry that I get are snippets of that, right? Like there's a serious piece and then there's like the undercurrent of like there's some humor here even when the stuff is going like really like deep and we're spinning out of control. There's this undercurrent of like being, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I appreciate that about you, and that I'm like, I'm going nuts, and you're like, okay. Excuse me, I haven't talked to you for 7 weeks, and you're gonna hit me with a hey, I'm
Yeah.
going nuts. I'm not expecting you to carry all that. It's more of a even just meeting it with a chuckle and being like, and I'm like, oh, it's not that serious, right? Like I could laugh too. It's funny, and it is. So I think there's something.
But my students, I'm pretty sure they think I'm nutty. Um, since you brought up like Halloween, that is my favorite holiday, and so I encourage them to dress up with me, and I'll give extra credit, right? And so I've been able to do that at this college more so. I think the last Halloween I spent at De Anza, I had international students, and they were just like, "Can we take pictures? We got to show our parents." And I was like, "Sure," because I was a dominatrix.
I remember that one. Yeah, yeah.
And for all y'all listening, watching, whatever, it wasn't super sexualized. It was, yeah, but it was fun. I did have a whip. It was fun.
And there's some, about layers of that in the context of the stuff we teach in the course of the quarter that just gives it a little extra oomph. All you had to show up with that day was a whip, and that would have been enough to, change the course of some conversations.
Man.
And it's wild. I would have students, it's like, do some art projects for me. And they're like, well, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? And people don't know what to do with that freedom. And it's like, yes, scaffolding, yes, samples. Also, when you're out in the world, creativity is going to be our saving grace. And it's
Yeah.
not always going to look artistic, but it's going to require a parallel process.
Yeah.
And so getting folks to value that. And if at the end of the day, bare minimum is that, being creative can also be challenging, then I feel like I've done, if that's all they got from that and not the other stuff that I was intending them to get from the outcomes, then I'm like, okay, well, then maybe you'll be more inclined to pay an artist in the future because that's the hard process, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you'll be more inclined to support those pauses, not just by leaning on artists in tough times, expecting this stuff to be a given because it's work, right? And I think if we all tapped into this idea that we're collective artists and poets and creators,
Yeah.
even in the blandest jobs, we'd be better for it.
Right.
That's
Yeah. It doesn't magically appear.
No. It's not like you're sitting there under a tree or in your private office I don't have one. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, let me take 12 months off of work so I can hash out this novel. No,
Right.
I wish, right? You gotta like out of the little crevices of time that you carve out and all of the expectations of you.
Yeah.
Make work to make work happen. And speaking of, you do have that children's book that you released some time ago.
Yep.
And you were like, here's my process. And then once you were like, I'm doing this, then you did it. And I was like, whiplash, it's out there. Learn by example. Still not ready to jump off the precipice on that one. But it's out there and it's hitting a different audience of folks. And
Yeah.
I'll admit, I make my college students read children's books for their speech class because you got to activate a whole lot of what we don't learn in a speech class, right? Like everybody kind of sounds and looks the same by standard, methods of communication. And I'm like, find your freaking voice. And if I'm going to invite you to play, then I'm going to tell you, read me a children's storybook to do that because it's a magic recipe of its own kind.
It is. It really is. That's so smart. Like I should have students do that. Like, when we get back face to face, like read some children's books in class because when it comes to them doing presentations, I'm the same way, like you need to find your voice and your voice is not you typing up everything you're going to say on your PowerPoint. If that's the case, I don't need to see you.
Exactly.
hold note cards, like I don't know, like
Play a little.
note cards?
Yeah, I would preface it like this. They'd be like, what is she gonna have us do now? And I'm like, okay, we're going to the library. And they're like, oh yeah, we're probably gonna go to the 5th floor over at State. And I'm like, no, we're gonna mob deep in the children's part and hope they don't kick us out because technically against rules. And so I got away with it a few times and I got in trouble a few times. And I had to be like, this is what I'm trying to do, understand, let them respect the kids too, because they also lose that. And just seeing them like go to the shelves and pick a book is a process. And it was one of my favorite things to watch in person because I'm like, that nostalgia, this story, and I used to read this one, and other people being like, oh, I'm too cool for this. This is so dumb. And then you walk around 15 minutes later and they're reading it and they're like into it deep. And you're like, I'm not watching you. Carry on,
Yeah.
and activating that like playful part of how you're supposed to be in a college classroom, right? How you're supposed to be in the workplace. And that I feel like is poetic work, right? Like disrupting, like in the costume, in the way you show up, in calling out certain injustices where people don't expect that anymore. Like, because you're showing
all that in a tutu.
Yes. Like a tutu takeover Tuesdays, that needs to be a thing. Let's do it.
Yeah, I would totally do it. You know I would.
I know.
But yeah, you made me think of dang, you know, all of those just those different places and positions we find ourselves in. And anyway, it made me think about another poem.
No, it did. That's
And
what I was hoping.
I'll keep it PG.
Part of the reason why I do this is because, you know, the poetess would invite us to be on the radio and be on, you know, the public radio stations. And they were like, careful with your language. And I'm like, oh, so I'd be there panicking, crossing stuff out in my poems because some of them, you know, are angry. They got that strong language. It's not bad words, it's just strong language.
Yeah.
And then I found out I couldn't say chingona on the radio. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And also here. So you can say whatever you want. All that to say it how you need to.
Well, how is your audience like? Are they okay with the double G?
This is audience who comes to find me, and so I mean, if you say what you need to say what needs to be said for the things that need the hearing, and I will remove myself from the stream for a second so you can do that fully.
Okay.
All right, I think I clicked all the right buttons.
Yeah. So life, you know, and all that good stuff. So I wrote this, I think it was after my divorce finalized or somewhere in the process. And it was such a release, right? That's why I love poetry. Like poetry it saved my life. So anyways, this is called This Nigga. This nigga be like, baby, is that you? And I be like, you know, it's me, daddy. If only he knew when I'm getting down with him, I'm thinking about you. If only he knew when he pressing his lips on my nipples, I'm thinking about the possibility of me opening my eyes, being surprised by you. This nigga be like, baby, you got money for food? I be like, you know I got it, daddy. All the while in my head, I'm thinking, damn, this nigga could at least try to pay here and there, because that shit hella foul and rude. All the while, I'm smiling in his face, trying to make him feel like a man, but a man is a man, and I can't make him feel that way. This nigga be like, baby, you got money for some weights? I'll be like, yeah, daddy, you know I got you. In the back of my head, I'm thinking, nigga, you so dead. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you ain't shit. In the back of my mind, I've left you 50 times or killed and left you in a ditch. This nigga be like, baby, you gonna have that kid? I'd be like, hell no. Everything changes. To your face, I tell you, I can't trust you. To your face, I tell you, you ain't no kind of man. To your face, I tell you, you're lazy as fuck. To your face, I tell you, I can do bad by myself. So I take my kids and I leave. That's it.
And again, right? You're not going to censor the poet.
So yeah, I just and one other thing too, like, you know how it's like some poets are really, really good at like going back and revising their works. Mm-hmm. I can't do that to save my life. I feel like if I go back and change anything after I've written it down, that then it changes like all the vibe that came from it, if that makes sense. So so I never touch anything. I write it down once and that's it.
I have a dance. There's some of them that's like, don't you dare touch me. And there's other ones that it's like, well, you know, and yeah. And there's some that just for reasons beyond us, right? And so I feel like folks who just jumped in there and they were like, what in the hell just happened? I'm like, what happened was I was not going to censor Professor Q because there's a reason she wrote to herself in that way, in that moment. And, you know, it's like there is a lot of controversy around the use of that word in and out of the community. And there's also rampant use, and I feel like, I'm not gonna justify or not, but it is how you wrote it and how you spoke it, and that's, your poem, your poetry,
Yeah.
and a conversation that you had with yourself in that moment and beyond that, you know,
Yeah.
that's the way that poem is speaking to you, so
And it's weird because
it's
I'm gonna tell you, the reason it's weird it even came to me like that, is because I don't even use the double G. I don't.
mm,
That's not part of my lexicon. So,
that's it.
um, yeah, I didn't grow up using it. My no one in my household did either. So, um, but when it came to me, it was like that's exactly what it is. Like, and you need to say
Mhm.
it this way, and you're gonna feel it I feel it every time I read it.
Okay.
Where I
Yeah.
was. So, so just so people have another, layered understanding of, well, at least for me, like how words come to me. So
And it's not a term easily tossed around by you, and that adds an additional layer of something you're gonna be grappling with, right? Like, that you feel it every time that this
right.
particular poem,
Yeah.
right?
Because I write it, I think in my book of poetry, I wrote it as this ninja because I was just like, I don't I don't know if I feel okay about and maybe at some point I'll go back and, take the ninja out and it'll be the double G. You know, um, but yeah, I grapple with that word and it doesn't bother me like when I hear friends use it, but um I remember being out at dinner a couple of times with my ex-husband and our friends, which are all guys, and they throw it around, and I would sit there and I'm just like, oh my gosh, are there any students in here that I know? Right? Because it's not like they were quiet, and so, but I wouldn't censor them either, it is what it is. But I notice I only do that like if we're in public. Like I don't do that when we're at home. Like I don't care,
Mhm.
or if we're hanging out with like, friends outside somewhere, like not really, but like in those kinds of environments, and probably because there was a higher um, possibility that students that I have would be there in that particular restaurant or whatever. And so because we'd be at BJ's. It's like right down the street from the school.
Right.
Um, and so yeah, I'd be like,
You
oh.
know, I had a parallel conversation with a student who was asking me, and I can't even remember what phrase or what it was, like a parallel, right, with our community. And I was like, oh, hell no. And then she was like, and then, I started thinking about context and use. And I know we have these conversations where it's like, it's never appropriate. And it's like, but is that the reality of where we're at? Because I feel like there are certain terms for my community that I'm like, okay, it's a process, it's a dance. We're not perfect, and I'm not excusing like my use of stuff, but I am saying there's something about context and something about who's being centered in a conversation that does matter in some of those instances. And for me, I'm trying to think of what the hell. That's like a subset of a few words that I'm like, well, I don't use it, but I also don't go around lecturing everybody all the time. One, because I would exhaust the hell out of myself just doing that, and two, sometimes you got to hear beyond the words, right? And it's not a defense or justification. It's
Yeah.
a lot of how I bring people into a conversation is this idea that we're human and we're working through shit simultaneously. And I'm not saying you got to pick and choose every battle, but I am saying, okay, we'll get to that point in the conversation that sometimes I'm not going to get to if I'm outright just always, always in that fight mode because I'm exhausted, too exhausted sometimes to always be in that fight mode, right? Like I gotta play assistant superintendent in my kid's school district. I don't have time when I hear the kid across the street using some language, but I do have time to yell at the kids next door sometimes when they're, throwing oranges over the fence at our kids. And I'm like, first of all, boys. And I said, "Where's your mama?" And my kids were like, "Oh, are you gonna fight their mom?" And I was like, "You lie, you're watching too much Netflix." And I was
Yeah.
like, and I said, I didn't just say your mama. I said, "Boys, where's your mama, your grandma, your auntie, your great grandma? I want to talk to all of them right now." They ran so fast, and they have not thrown oranges in like 4 days. But it wasn't that I was gonna call out their mama. I said, they were like, "What would you have done if their mom had come over, mom?" I would have said, "I want your boys to apologize to you for representing you in that way. Not, I'm going to fight your mama." I want you to be accountable right now to the people who are raising you, because if I can't tolerate you for 5 minutes because you're wilding out, your mama needs some compassion. And it starts with an apology from how you're doing her wrong, not how she's doing you wrong in that way, right? And it's like a nuanced little loosely parallel, but it reminded me of who we call out and how, and who
Mm-hmm.
we call in and how language for sure is coded throughout time, and pieces of the conversation that get amplified in the moment that hold us to certain obligations to silence ourselves. It's a funky kind of dance, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. I got like animals like constantly coming by. I'm so nosy. Like I have cats that hang out. I don't like cats, but they hang out. I have birds. I have squirrels. They just keep coming by the door, and so I keep. So if it looks like I'm not listening, I
Look
just
at this world. I do it. But I know I said I wasn't going to keep you all day, and I don't know if you want to throw a third into the mix, or just some parting little words, because I can keep you for hours. But we both got a mountain of obligations and stuff we don't want to do,
I don't want to.
and stuff we really want to maybe watch. No.
Yeah, I don't want to do any of the stuff that I'm supposed to do. Yeah. What I would like is to lay down and take a nap. But I'm not a napper. And so napping becomes a chore. Cuz it never happens. Like I'll lay there and it's just like my brain just keeps,
Keeps going.
yeah, and it won't leave me alone, and so there I am.
Mhm.
um yeah, I
And
don't.
in some ways, that's why the Netflix is so sexy, right? Because it's like I can get lost in someone else's story without having to go over the list of 20 things that come to mind while I'm sitting there in the do nothingness, because it ain't coming.
Right, exactly.
And
Exactly.
there's something about that writing process. It's true for you, but the way you talked about your poems, and even the one where it's like you feel that language every time you read it, where it's like we're receiving them and transmitting them and recording them, but they don't always belong to us in the way that we belong to them, the words themselves.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, like um it's like I'm almost transported, Um and so but that's the beauty of like written works in general,
Yeah.
and that creative process and stuff, and uh feeling warmth um at times just by, putting it on paper. Or I feel that way even if I draw something, it can look horrible, but because I'm not very good at drawing, but um, it could look horrible, but there's still like this energy around it that I think, you're getting at too. that is just there. Like it just can be, right? Yeah.
And have to have an end in mind or a goal to meet, and that it just is. And if it turns into something, whether it be a children's book or a collection or a book on your expertise, then it gets there in its time, right? And that I'm deeply in gratitude for how you flow like that, because
Thank
you
you.
have managed to produce quite a bit by our normal standards in that way. And
Um,
that my process.
I have like five, I think like no, maybe four different books, and they're all different genres and different like themes and that I'm working on. And so I just whenever I get the creativity or the thoughts or whatever, I just type it up and then like walk away. So and that's been going on since last year.
And it, in their due time, and that's how it goes. And I
Yeah.
think that's again the value of your example for the rest of us, even though it's not something that you're doing on purpose. There's something about you doing your stuff with purpose that it helps a lot of us untangle by way of your example, right? I talked to an agent at one point years ago, and she was like, you got to decide what shelf you want to be on. And I'm like, you just called out the most indecisive bitch over here to be like, pick one shelf. And I'm over here like strategizing. How can I pick the one shelf that's the catch all? And I can get stuck there. And when I see folks who do the way you do, it reminds me, Prince was that way. It reminds me, Oprah is that way. It reminds me we've got a whole list of folks who don't just do things one way and on one shelf, and we need more of that reminding from each other, and not by any means of obligation, but just simply being you and how you vibe is the thing itself that reflecting back to us a lot of possibility, a lot of hope. And hope isn't always perfect and is not always going to use the socially acceptable language of the times, and sometimes it's going to leave some thorns on the tip of your tongue, and that's where we are right now.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for coming on.
I miss talking with you.
And if you're okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast, but I'm going to invite you to stay with me for 2 more minutes before I accept.
Okay.
All is coming to a close. So folks, thank you so much for taking some time out on your Monday. I'm gonna hopefully be playing along like this for a few weeks, but again, I don't want to make that huge commitment. It's kind of like that Prince vibe. If there's tickets, and the tickets are free in this particular case, and you don't got to leave your house. So thanks again. We'll catch you on the next one.